Hi.
Why, hello, everybody. This is panel 3 of our lovely live show series here at Diversely Geek, and I am your Diversely Geek mom, Neisha Mulchan, CEO and co-founder of Diversely Geek and the Diversely Me Foundation. And today we are going to have a pretty dynamic conversation. Listen, panel 2 was incredible, guys. If y'all tapped into that was something, wasn't it? Woo! We didn't even want to leave it. But and today we're going to be just as equally dynamic, I think. I'm co-hosting with the wonderful Letitia Jones, where we're really tapping into a very interesting conversation, which is about whose story are we telling anyway, in terms of equality, inclusion, and mental health across the spectrum of fandom. Who are we allowing to tell our stories, and is it even possible they're telling it correctly when they haven't asked us? I mean, they kind of have to ask us, right? So, Jay, if you want to, oh my goodness, you know what? If Jay wants to pop in here, you can go right ahead and pop in here. You'll be like our special guest. Jay Jackson's on.
Oh, hey, Jay.
Hey, Jay. Always happy to have you around, Jay. We love you.
I know.
If you want to drop in, Jay, go ahead and use the StreamYard link. You can add yourself right onto this panel. We'd be happy to have you 100%.
Come on.
Come on, they said. Okay, so this is going to be a lot more dynamic because I'm actually a panelist today. I'm representing the Asian community. We have our wonderful friend Lizzie Martinez, who's representing a dichotomous community because there's a lovely spectrum. And she's going to self-identify as well, which is part of what we're doing today. Also, the lovely Lauren White. My fellow very nerdy, sciencey person. And the lovely JCW. Are you okay, JC?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
I know what day it was yesterday.
If people only knew. I have no idea. It was
we there. We feel it. Oh, my lovely Latoya Cherie.
Hi.
My cultural ambassador.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about what that means today. And of course, my spectacular love friend, Letitia Jones.
That's me. Oh, I feel so special.
A fantastic educator. I don't think your educator bone, like, it ever turns off.
It doesn't.
It really doesn't, does it?
No.
We are supposed to have Javier Cruz Winnick with us as well. He's having some tech difficulties with his phone, I believe, to be able to jump in. Yeah, oh my God! Look who joined us today. I'm so happy.
Thank you for the impromptu invitation. This is you can ask Latoya because she's been a frequent guest on my show. This is for to get wild. Like it
will,
but thank you for the invitation. Thanks for having me.
So bearing in mind, guys, remember that lovely little note I put in our chat earlier today. I want everyone to understand that we are going to be very real about our discussion, but it's not going to be a politicized conversation. It's about personal experience and diaspora in the long run. It's about us understanding how to tell our stories, but in a way that the fans who are an audience who are listening are going to go, oh my God, I never had that perspective. I really couldn't have never understood that. And hopefully we're sharing and teaching each other as well while we do this. So our panel today is, whose story are we telling? Equality, inclusion, and mental health across the spectrum. Fandom, pop culture, and, any other media you want to add in there. So we're going to let Miss Letitia take it away. Oh my God, here he is. Woo!
Hello, Javier. We're happy to have you.
He's like, I couldn't make this easy. No way. Let me throw a curveball. All right, my friend, you have a full panel. Let's get going.
All right, let's get started. Well, The theme of this panel, as everyone knows, is whose story are we telling? But I think in that question, we actually have some multiple questions in there, because you can look at it different ways, whether you are a consumer, so whether you're purchasing or watching this media, or if you're a creator. So as a consumer, one of the questions is, whose story is being told to me, right? And then as a creator, the question can become, whose story am I telling? So we can come to this from multiple angles, and the story that is being told to you can absolutely affect your mental health, and how many of those stories are being told to you. So just like things to think about as we move forward. And one thought that I had that I want to bring in from, as Neisha said, I am an educator, so the educator brain is always on. And one of the theories that they talk about when it came to education and curriculum was this idea of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors when it comes to reading. That you can have a piece of material that is a mirror, so it reflects your experience. You have a piece of material that is a window, so you can see someone else's experience. And then you can use your imagination or find a connection with something that is different from you. And that then becomes a sliding glass door. So it may not be exactly what you experience, but you can step through and be a part of it in your own way. So if you kind of think about those different kinds of experiences, and then also on the extremes, you can also think about what happens when you only see mirrors and no windows. What happens when you see all windows and no mirrors? Nothing looks like you. And then also, what happens if you're someone who is not used to going through sliding glass doors, and when you're someone who always goes through sliding glass doors? So just keep that in our brains. And so I have a couple of questions for the panel just to get started. The first one is, who was the first character that you connected with, that you felt there was some aspect of that story that reflected you, and what was it?
So I don't mind starting. I had to think really hard about this question, because I think I don't normally watch things that way. I probably have like a larger cerebral view of it. So my initial thought was, maybe like every Disney princess that wanted to be something else, like somewhere else. And then I was like, no, that doesn't work. So then I go back to Star Trek, because I'm a huge Trekkie. I was wearing my badge. And so one of the things that I realized that I say to myself lately is like, I'm half Vulcan or something. And so there's this part of me that's a Kirk, because I always end up somehow leading a group in school, when I was doing my master's, at work, just like kind of being in that captain's chair. I'm part of a Starfleet chapter and became the commanding officer and managed everything. And I finally passed that on, and I tend to just speak my mind. So there's that one half, but then there's this other, I guess, very process oriented, maybe partially autistic brain that's like wants to emotionally detach sometimes, which is odd, because part of my autism is inability to control my emotions. And I think about those times, there's sometimes Spock just lost it. More original series, like when he's like so happy that Kirk didn't die or something like that, and then he pulls it back. And that's how I feel sometimes when I'm talking to people, because I'm not used to sharing about myself. And when I do, probably because I'm bottling and I needed to get it out, I'm like, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And I'm just going back to my more logical, keep everything inside self. And sometimes I get very stuck there. So it's interesting to see those two conflicting dynamics within myself.
Thank you for sharing. And it actually makes me think of, when it comes to various mental health diagnoses, there's plenty of us who don't get diagnosed.
Yep.
Or for whatever reason yeah, or who don't have the access. But sometimes we see these characters who reflect aspects of our personality and our lived experience that we don't see other places.
Mhm.
You know, and even if they don't necessarily look like us, we can be like, wait, but I know that behavior because I me them. Oh,
And I didn't get diagnosed with autism until I was 34, which is so this past December. And people that know me were like, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, that tracks.
Totally.
Like, literally somebody said that. They're like, that tracks. That makes sense. Because they're like, my college professor said that. He's like, I watched how difficult it was for your classmates to interact with you. But he always loved that I kind of looked at everything differently. So people like, even my hairdresser was like, yeah, you didn't know? I knew.
It's interesting because one of my all-time favorite, see this guy right here?
Oh, yeah.
There's a
Sonic
Sonic
screwdriver.
So this is my Sonic, and it's my 13th Dr. Sonic. And I think for my entire existence, I really connect with you on what you're saying, Lauren, because again, 55. So my sci-fi connectors were Star Trek originally, but also Doctor Who. And a lot of people could never understand how me, in my particular cultural foundation, could connect to the Doctor. Because when I found the Doctor was a 50-something-year-old Anglo-Saxon male. And how does a person like me and a kid like me at 13 connect to this character? But I think it was the fluidity of the mind and how quickly the Doctor's mind has always moved, and how in the movement of the mind and in the reasoning and the right action and always in the ultimately there's a goal to do the right thing and to heal, even though the Doctor's not a doctor. Everyone knows that, right? But it was the reason I pursued medicine, as weird as that sounds. I always, as this young little Indian girl, I don't know, I didn't connect obviously to the racial, I connected to the heart and the soul of the possibility, the fact that this character had a mind that didn't sit still. And I realized early that my mind could never sit still. I struggled in school, Lauren, massively. It took me ages to figure out I had the level of dyslexia that I have, which is why, as you guys know, I write backwards. Everybody's seen me do it. So, and sometimes my brain thinks backwards. And in medicine, it's been a real huge challenge, but I've been able to manage it. It took me forever to realize it's because I knew how to connect to the madness of the Doctor's mind. As weird as that sounds, I guess I've always connected to the mental health spectrum then, and the spectrum itself, because I always felt that the Doctor was created as a character who had the ability to be a spectrum character because of the neurodivergence that the Doctor's constantly experiencing and manifesting. So there you go. That's kind of my connection in that sense, which is, yeah.
That actually,
I think it's very interesting that you bring that up too, because like Letitia said, that I recognize that behavior, right? So you see that, you're able to connect with that, you have that experience that's now a shared experience. And I think that speaks to why Doctor Who has lasted as long as it has. It's the longest running show that's in history. From black and white TV to current day, it still has seasons that we're waiting for the next season. So I think it speaks to how well that show has been written and how much they have tried to consider other people than just themselves. So, like, people spoke about how there was never a female Doctor. And boom, we see a female Doctor. People were talking about we haven't seen enough of the companions that have been of different, ethnicities and backgrounds. And boom, we see different people of different backgrounds. They're very responsive, I believe, to the population that are enjoying the show, and they're aware of that. And I think that's why a panel like ours exists, because we need more of that. We need more of the people that are going to say, the audience is asking for these things. They need these things, and we're going to provide that for them. And I think that's very indicative of the success of Doctor Who, and whatever long-standing shows are out there, they're responsive in that way.
That's thank you very much. That actually really helps me to look at it from that perspective. And I do say that to other fans a lot, and I don't think they'd ever truly understand what I'm tapping into when I say why I connect in the way that I do. And that's okay, because fans see things in different ways. So I don't want to monopolize. Who else is telling their story?
I had a thought as you guys were speaking. I kind of had like a kind of moment just now, because I was breaking down to my partner the other day about how I watch media, especially like with movies and TV shows specifically. Music's a little bit different. But I was talking about how like I was always like seeking out more so the female or feminine perspective. So, I mean, I noticed when y'all would talk, like I just kind of didn't want to like hear anything about boys. I think honestly it's because I had brothers. I'm right in the middle of brothers. The only other woman in the house was my mom, and she's like, she's my mom. So it's like she's not going to really have like the same perspective as I was. And so I was constantly looking for that. And I was thinking like, I don't know if I've had like one character. I was always trying to I found bits and pieces of characters that I took, but I never really, I don't think I identified wholly with like one character, honestly, until like Issa Rae, to be real. Because she was just like, she had that whole awkward Black girl series on YouTube. And I was like, I identify with this, and just kind of being like a little like what people would call like off. And so I was listening to you guys speaking, and I was like, I think I've since then tried to go back a little bit and with a little bit more of an open mind, but I think I'm kind of discovering now, seeing those quirks in people, because they didn't show a lot of that in the female characters. They weren't showing a lot of those quirks and stuff in the Black characters. So it's almost like, unless and I think that's where, having the mirror works out. It's just like, I kind of need to see someone of my background going through some of these things, especially when you're in communities like the Black community sometimes doesn't talk about those things. And so if I never see it, I'm not exposed to it, I just kind of don't know. And then if everything's just like centered around like, oh, this is the male perspective, well, even a lot of those things with being on the spectrum, they're different for females. And so it was just very interesting to kind of get that, I don't know, just kind of have that aha moment, really. And I was like, oh, maybe that's where that's coming from.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Yes.
That actually makes me think of, I'm like in the middle of a Star Trek Discovery binge right now. And watching Michael Burnham go through her journey, but also the fact that she was raised on Vulcan. And so she has those, similar like repressed traits. You're trying to figure everything out. And then for me, what I find interesting about watching Discovery, which is different than, ironically, other Star Trek series, is that other Star Trek series, you have it's a very nerdy show and people are into it, but not all the characters themselves are actually nerds. But Discovery is a science vessel. So everyone gets excited about math and science and physics. It's really cute and interesting. But, watching, a young Black woman be the science officer and being excited about these different, nerding out things in a setting that I'm like, oh my gosh, I can like see myself on the bridge, right? Not that I didn't love, so many of the properties before, because I did, but it ends up being a different experience. And I feel like when you're someone who was used to, like Latoya said, grabbing just bits and pieces, oh, I kind of get this, I kind of get this, I kind of get this. When you see someone who's like, wait, I don't have to do as much work. Is this what everyone else goes through? This what not having to trip over myself.
It makes you live life in pieces, because I'm like, okay, well, I can have this trait, but I can't have it with this trait, and this trait also, because like usually those, like with I think the very first one was probably Jasmine from Aladdin, because she was like, again, like we had a dominant female character that was just like, I can do stuff on my own. Like she had her own adventures. She had her own stuff going on. I was like, okay, like this. And then I thought of like Rochelle from The Craft. And I was like, okay, I understand what she's going through. She has mostly a European American like friend group, but she's also dealing with stuff that they don't have to deal with. And then she also has this like inner power that she doesn't quite know what to deal with. I was like, I understand that. But usually in those situations, that's the one and only quirk. But I'm like, I have all of this. So now I feel like extra weird because I'm dealing with all of this at the same time. And I've never seen anybody deal with all of this at the same time. And then that's a whole
if I may, I want to kind of jump off from that because Letitia, when you mentioned Star Trek, I mean, you and I have talked Trek before. Like I'm super Trekkian to answer the question of what character I identify the most or most with. You know, for me, it's Geordi LaForge from Next Generation because it was the seeing a Black male character who he's not a player, he's not a thug, he's not an athlete, he's a nerd, he's a geek. He goes by the manual and all of these things. He's the one who makes the ship go, right? Seeing that to me made it okay for me to be, I don't have to be the player or the gangster or the thug or whatever the case may be, those prescribed roles. I can that I can fit the nerd role, right? I can be captain of the chess club, I can be on Quiz Bowl, and that's okay, right? What you made me think of just now, Latoya, was how when you talk about having to find pieces of yourself in this media, in pop culture, how problematic actually when you look at a particularly older Trek pre-Discovery, how problematic that is when we start to look at who's telling those stories. Yes, we have Uhura. Yes, we have Geordi, but it's still Gene Roddenberry and Brandon Braga and Rick Berman, old to middle-aged white dudes telling these stories about people in populations that they don't know anything about. And so what ended up happening, I think that Trek has come better about it. It's starting addressing it a little bit more head on, especially with DS9 and Cisco as it comes to race. But when we start looking at that question, we kind of have to go back, and it kind of makes me go back and reevaluate that. Okay, Geordi was great for me in that moment as a kid growing up in the late 80s. Is that enough now?
So if I can jump off of that, I think a lot of people don't know the foundation of Star Trek and the foundation that Roddenberry built it on, which is something I've also appreciated, which is IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And so one of the things I love about Star Trek, like I'll be diehard TOS forever. It just is. I think as there were certain things you couldn't do, right? Back in the 60s. So the original pilot, clearly we're going to talk about Star Trek a lot, which means I'm going to nerd out completely. So the original pilot for Star Trek, Majel Barrett, was number one, right? She was number one. And they were trying to bring, Majel Barrett was supposed to be like one of the main characters, and CBS was like, no, you can't do that. You can't have a woman in that lead role.
Right.
And so they redid the pilot and they recast everybody except Spock. And Roddenberry had to fight for Nichelle Nichols to be in that role. And she almost left it until Martin Luther King convinced her not to during the second season. So I think there was a fight for it, and I appreciate that he had that foundation that I think people have forgotten. So when Discovery came out, there was so much complaining about white genocide or that there were just like, why do we have an Asian captain or a Black science officer or a gay couple? And I've seen it just in groups that I belong to on Facebook. And I think true Star Trek fans and people that understand that foundation are bringing it with them into the generations and the new shows and into the future. And I'm loving the increased understanding and progressiveness of it that started kind of with Roddenberry trying to make that the future of the world. Is just people outside of it wouldn't accept it.
Right, which is
Well,
why
one thing
so early on. Sorry, go ahead.
One thing I think is, things cover, because I feel like we're talking about actually a lot of awesome things right now. And if you want to talk about like the original series came out before the Loving v. Virginia case was settled. And if you don't know, that is the case that basically made interracial marriage legal in America. And the first Star Trek came out before that. So if you're thinking about kind of like the
generation kiss.
Right.
Isn't that what like to make that happen? They being able to like, see that and as an example to say, you know, it's not so crazy to be able to do these things in the real world.
Possibly, but then also I'm thinking like if you're thinking about like the structure that the original Trek was like fighting against and how strong it was and what was limited, you have chipping at it and chipping at it and chipping at it, and then subsequent series continually chipping at this kind of larger superstructure that is trying to keep people apart. But then also, we're talking about kind of seeing ourselves and like the importance of, Nichelle Nichols and Julia LaForge and Michael Burnham and how that helps to shape who we are, being told like, this is okay. It's okay to be different. It's okay to be nerdy. It's okay to, so I've kind of got two questions which are different. One, because Jay, you brought this up, about the creators having characters who have different backgrounds than they do. So, one of my questions is like, do you think creators have a responsibility to tell diverse stories accurately? And then how is that accuracy determined? And a completely different question is, how does seeing different characters who you feel reflect parts of you or reflect parts of your existence, how do you think that helped shape you or, shapes your self-concept?
How we go, JC? You knew we would ask you the hard one, so come on.
The two-pronged age-old question. How we view creator and creation. How I've watched so many white writers write Storm, and I'm just like, I have a platform to kind of drag her, but I don't. This isn't authentic. I can drag her on the principle of what Ta-Nehisi Coates has done. I cannot drag her on the premise of what Scott Lobdell and Joe Kelly have done. I can drag Hickman. Jonathan Hickman, I love you. But Chris Claremont gave you the blueprint on how to write this girl, and you threw it to the wind and made her a shaman. For better or worse of what leadership looks like, I think you betrayed a lot of integrity of what Storm had. And I think you left with the reset continuity that was dragged out. However, Jonathan Hickman is a white man. Am I really supposed to be mad at him for how he's directed this grand project where he's in charge of a bunch of people that are in the room? And Letitia, you called it, what is it called? We discussed this before, when there's a person that's supposed to be ahead of it before it hits the print.
Oh, the sensitivity readers.
Sensitivity reader. So I've been on Twitter talking about some, they need a diversity chair in the room that approves, different blah, blah, blahs, and me not knowing how it works. Then I find out about sensitivity readers, and I'm just like, oh, well, why is the sensitivity reader not coming in and making any, progression on this? So whether I hold a writer accountable, I think 5 years ago, I wouldn't have. I think today, now that I'm informed about things like sensitivity readers, that yeah, we do need to hold our writers accountable. I honestly feel like now we're at a place where when somebody sees Miss America, when somebody sees Jon Stewart as Green Lantern, when somebody sees Neil Shahar, who is an Indian American Thunderbird from Marvel, who in Extreme X-Men in 2004 was foretold by Bishop in his future that he would become a host of the Phoenix. And you picked up, I think his sister's name is Kamala Shandar. You picked her up, and she is now Omega Sentinel, you know, in the current timeline, but you left Neo out in the dust and you created this whole grand scheme of representation that could go forward in the room. And now we're sitting here with this character that just went to waste, and you gave the Phoenix Force to a Daredevil character. I'm trying to make sense of this, but I mean, where, you know, logistics of continuity is concerned, yeah, I think that sensitivity readers need to come into the room and really say, hey, wait, we got this, we got that, we got this, we got that. Because now we're throwing diversity in certain fandoms now. And we don't want to get lost in throwing diversity at the sake of keeping continuity that's more coherent for an overall project.
And so I was about to ask you, if you don't mind me asking real quick, Letitia, I know what I'm thinking when you say this. What do you think is missing when you're putting in what's considered to be the normative state of diversity versus authentic?
So you know, it's like when people say that there's a difference between being diverse and being inclusive. So if we talk about diversity, sometimes you're just throwing numbers at it. We've got 4 Indian Americans, 3 Chinese Americans, and 4 Black people, and 1 person from Ecuador. Great, we're diverse. But you're not listening to a single one of them. And not talking about the differences that are within their cultures, or the subtleties, or, you know, being afraid to write a kind of like cultural inside joke, which only a certain portion of the population would understand, but that's fine. You know, I was actually I just saw a post about Black Lightning, and I'm mad that I'm forgetting the main villain's name. But they were like, what I love about him is that he insults people using like Black cultural insults, like specific insults that you may, if you're not in the culture, you may not get that's an insult, but you may not get how bad it is. But it's like that cultural understanding is fundamental in getting these characters when people want to feel seen. Because what happens, I feel, is that sometimes we'll see characters of different races, ethnicities, and they don't behave like someone I know. And it doesn't mean that there's a way to, you know, for instance, to act Black or to act a certain ethnicity or certain, but it does mean that there is, you know, a certain groundedness to it. There has to be a way of like, even if you're not doing something that people think is stereotypical of what they think your race ethnicity group would do, that person is still grounded in who they are.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't change. I see you, Lauren.
Well, perfect examples of what you're talking about are the Super Friends back in the 80s, and then G.I. Joe. They had the sprinkle of everybody. Hey, let's throw these people in the mix. Let's throw, you know, that Native American character that you know, is in touch with the spirits. And we have the Chinese guy that does Kung Fu. And we have, you know, he wears the regalia and all that. But they did only a little bit of the work. And I think that's the biggest part of it. If you're not going to be of the culture, if you're not going to be the person that's involved in creating these stories, then, part of the culture of those stories, then you got to do the work. You got to do the research. You got to reach out to people of that culture. You got to run it past them and say, what do you think of this? And I think that was why Moana was so good, was Disney finally realized that they messed up in trying to, they tried to, what is it called? Put the trademark on Day of the Dead. And then there was a backlash on Twitter. Lalo, I forget Lalo's last name, but Lalo he is a political cartoonist, and he did Muerto Mouse. He did Dead, you know, Mickey Mouse is like a Day of the Dead character, and it caught such a buzz that Disney was like, okay, wake up call, we messed up, let's get him on and have. Actually, it wasn't Moana, it was Coco. Yeah, where he ended up being. Coco, yeah. Yep, and he ended up being a consultant on Coco. And they ran things past him. What do you think of this? Is this okay? Does this work in the community? Is this something that you've experienced? Blah, 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 blah. And then they made the same smart gesture in going to the Pacific Islands and talking to, you know, people of that background to make Moana. And then Moana is another beautiful, you know, representation of another culture that you can tell they've done the work. They asked, they got people involved. One of the people of the culture was saying, we're always having to be impacted by all these other stories. When can they be impacted by us?
So I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, because we haven't heard from Lizzie as yet. And I do want to address what Sharon and Reels and Heels are talking about. As I'm literally going to jump into that conversation. So let's hear from Lizzie first, if that's okay. And then I'm going to talk about Kim's convenience, if that's okay for you guys.
Yes.
So my concern with movies, when I'm a little person myself, I only stand 3'7", which to most people, if you look at the height of a doorknob or your waist, that's where I'm at. So that's a good reference that I give people. I find it hard with diversity for little people in films because I see a lot of little people are the puns of the joke. In Elf, in Bad Santa, but it's like no one looks at little people seriously because we're always the pun of somebody's joke. And I think until we're actually put into serious roles in films, whatever diversity or whatever ethnicity we have, we're never going to be taken serious. So I'm high on trying to support, and I want more awareness for little people in films and whatever they do. There is not enough of that. And like I said, I'm tired of little people, the pun of the joke. When is there going to be a serious take on a leading little lady? We have Peter Dinklage,
That's
who's
it.
leading that. Yeah. And there's a few other little people, but unless you're in the entertainment industry or you know somebody, you're not getting in. And I've even spoken to directors and producers and agents, and they don't know how to work in little people. I've had writers, script writers tell me, we don't know how to write for your kind of people.
Then ask.
Right? Just write. Right now, somebody said, Liz sat on the couch. How hard is that? So I've had to make my own world, create my own world, and I write scripts. And I'm a professional scriptwriter. So I write and I try to promote to bring little people in, to show other little people. Listen, you can have romance films, you can have comedy, you can have serious films, whatever it may be. But include little people and make it realistic. Don't try to make it something it's not, because we'll never be looked at seriously. We'll always be a joke to everybody. And if there's supposedly inclusion and a lot of diversity in entertainment, there needs to be more seen for little people in general.
And then across all cultures, because hello, it's everybody, every culture has the exact same body types, right? And these body types. So 100%. You created your own work, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I actually created a character called the Shrew. I call her my alter ego. She's a little person superhero villain that got tired of all the crime and all the hatred in her own city where she lives, and she takes it on herself and came across an ex-superhero that's decided to help her take on everything that's gone on in her city.
There's a question for you, Lizzie.
Yes.
So do you think that those little people that are in the profession have to be or do things against their ideals to continue working?
Yes, I do. I think a lot of little people, at least a lot that I've met in the entertainment business, they do things because they want to be seen and hoping that once they're seen, no matter what, even if they're the pun of the joke, that some director or somebody's going to take them serious and give them an opportunity. Just like they gave Peter Dinklage. And what is it, Lord of Game of Thrones? He had more of he was taken more serious, and other people want that opportunity. But he got in because he
Lord
knew
of the Rings
somebody.
was a lost opportunity. They had the opportunity to literally cast people across the world to be in the dwarf culture. And what did you do? You used manipulation, CG, to make that not a possibility. Thanks for that comment also, Reels and Heels, about plus size women and the struggle to be able to take them serious as well.
I have so many thoughts.
Have them, Lauren. Have all of them.
I have you thought, and I still want to tap into King's Convenience before we leave, because for me, from an Asian perspective, I really want to touch on what happened there.
So there's a couple of things. First of all, Tyrion Lannister is one of the greatest characters ever. I just got to say that about Game of Thrones. But there were two different things. One that kind of goes to the theme that we had here, and another thing that goes to what Lizzie was saying. And I actually was going to tag Lizzie in this thought. The first part, like Letitia, when you mentioned like what is black, what's white, how you're supposed to act, whatever. And I've always felt like an outsider. And I think we all struggle with people saying they're not seeing color, or people not knowing how you're supposed to act in a certain situation. And I hate when somebody says to me like, oh, I thought you were a white woman because you speak like so nicely and all that. And that had a huge effect on my mental health growing up, because people are like, oh, you're black, but you kind of talk white. And it's like, the white people don't want you, the black people don't want you either. And you're kind of somewhere in the middle, but then you got like this weird brain, and you're kind of this quirky nerd that nobody knows how to deal with. So you're just like off over here feeling like a loner. And that, I think that's where like a lot of my depression and anxiety came from, growing up, like in addition to just growing up in a strict religion where I was very shy, very quiet, kind of kept to myself, and people have said like, you just looked sad. And that's been one of the nice things about having the autism diagnosis, is that I'm different. My mentor is like, you don't fit in any box. And I think I'm finally at a point where I can embrace that. But there are still certain days, like Lizzie and I were talking about it earlier. She said, what did you do today? I'm like, nothing. This is one of my, I am not peopling weekends. Everybody go away. I'm going to embrace my introvert, because I will tell my boss I need a mental health day, because I can't promise you that if I come in tomorrow, anybody else will leave with their life. And like, you just have to know, you got to know your brain and know your limits and this stuff.
I can't say that in medicine.
I told you, like, I don't care. And this is probably the first job that I've gone into where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be my whole self, and you can love it or hate it. And I'm going to be weird and quirky and whatever else you think. But another quick point I wanted to bring up is, one of my new favorite movies is A Quiet Place. And one of the things that John Krasinski did was cast a real deaf girl in that deaf girl role. And I love that. I love the movie, first of all. I love everything about it, like all that. I love the combination of emotion and science fiction, which is why I like a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies, because I think he kills that. I love Interstellar. And then also, I work on Star Trek fan films at a studio, and I've acted in a couple of them. And one of the guys that directs it, his wife is deaf. And what I like is that he often puts her in a communications role. So she's getting the information, and he'll ask her a question and she signs it. You know, he'll turn to her and he'll sign and act off of that. And she's the sweetest person in the world. And I love that even in our little fan film community, that we're trying to bring those differences in there too. All right, I'm done. I had to get all that out of my head.
All right, but Neisha wanted to talk.
I do. I can grab it at the end, because we lost Lizzie for a moment. Javier wanted to say something really quickly.
I actually wanted to ask her a question, and she's not here.
Yeah, we'll do this again. I knew, Letitia and I knew this was going to be dynamic, and we'd be lucky to get through 2 questions.
It's funny. We actually naturally navigated through many of the questions that we had, which I totally expected.
I know Jason wants to ask a question. Is that something we can do?
We're speaking a message about something, and I want to give you guys an assignment. And Letitia, a couple of other you guys, I would like to have you guys on. You know, we're debuting Getbox Facebook page, and we're going to start doing our podcasting soon. So, Solar King's movie is coming out this Friday. I want to discuss the portrayal of Zola King by Taylor Page in comparison to her other roles, specifically Asha Hayes. It's really on message with what we're talking about how you have to be a little bit white or a little bit black or a little bit ratchet, a little bit ghetto. Taylor Page is a certain type of actress, and I'm very interested to see how she's going to perform throughout this film. And I want to have a conversation with you guys about it because
bring it back around when we've all had a chance to watch it. Let's set a time for us to do that, because that's a lot of what our shows are going to, what our programming is going to be through our workshops. Is being able to bring this type of language and narrative together and really hash it out, knowing that we don't have the answers, people. I mean, we're all figuring it out, right? So, it's to be able to give other people a space where they feel safe to be able to workshop it with us. So that's a good workshop to start with, JC. I love it.
One thing I wanted to mention, I saw the comment that was, I think it was Ian, I was talking about,
I wrote, yes, absolutely, Ian, 88. I wrote that down because I was like, same, like,
yes,
same. Buffy, right, the instinct, everything, same.
Buffy, all of that. And but also I want to talk about, and Lauren, you mentioned this, that there are, when you are moving through different communities, the expectation of who you're expected to be is, can always be problematic. And what it seems like people miss is that I'm always multiple things, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like this, like, oh, you're supposed to be in this box, you're in this box. You don't understand. Boxes don't work for me. I am everything and nothing you expect all at the same time. So,
okay,
so right. But even that, right? We're talking also about like nerdiness and all of that, and you're bringing a specific cultural reference in, which if you talk about kind of and it does often end up being kind of like this American Eurocentricity, when it comes to the geek space. I am still a geek. I'm still interested in this. Doesn't mean that I will, make my Star Trek fan vid to a Bruce Springsteen song. That's not going to happen for me. But that also doesn't mean that if I'm, watching Destiny's Child, I might decide to draw them all in Star Trek uniforms. That is also something that's very me, right? And so, being able to say I am all of my identities all the time without having to cut it off. Because people are like, oh, yes, I thought you sounded white, or I don't see color. No, if you don't see color, you don't see me.
We run into that all the time. I think that's kind of the flip side of what LaToya was saying earlier about taking pieces of yourself from these different properties and different stories to make you, right? Well, what that becomes is that you are this mosaic of things just by the nature of being human, but two, because I feel like Hollywood and corporate media or mainstream media, I hate that, but you know what I mean by that, tends to understand things one way. I am a queer black man. I never saw myself being those two things that I always am. Never saw myself reflected about it in any sort of mainstream way or any big way until The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I've seen there were gay black characters, but they were always played for jokes. They were always only for like one episode, one or two, story arcs, and then they're done. I've never got to really experience that because of exactly what you're talking about, Letitia. And I think that I feel like we're starting to kind of like smarten up to that, but we still have a long way to go within that.
Neisha, please talk about Kim's Convenience, because honestly, I want to hear about that, because I don't have an opinion, because I don't know. So
I'm about to blow your mind a little bit wild. Are you ready for this, guys?
Yes. I'm not, but I'm super excited.
So you see this entire panel that we're sitting here right now? The perspective we live in is the one that we know. We live in an Euro-Amero, Afro, migrant-centric dynamic, correct? I hope I covered it all. let's understand something that Letitia and I toggled on with her a month ago. Just remember that the fandom media, the way that you're seeing it today, pop culture, from music to art across the spectrum, is also being digested and ingested across this world. The perspective that we are seeing, feeling, touching on, and ingesting, our dynamic of it is only one drop point, guys. Everyone across the world is also having the same dynamic. And we need to remember that even in the box you're sitting in this moment, every one of us has to remember that we should. I would love all of us to adopt a global perspective when we even make our choices. Remember that there's a lot of culture, there's a lot of media, there are a lot of choices outside of just the centricity of what we see today, and even the narrative that we are seeing within our own social cultural dynamics. We need to step outside of even this box that we're in now. One of the things I was saying to you before, there are no boxes, my friend. They shouldn't even exist. If you want them to exist like the way Ian said it, as puzzle pieces that fit together eventually. So we have to see the world in that way, because that's how I see it. I don't see it in any other way. I see it as a spectrum for my entire existence. I've never seen it differently. That's why I have never had a true connection, because growing up here from the age of 3 in this country, where I told you guys, my connection point almost didn't exist. So from the viewpoint of Kim's Convenience, where they followed every single trope you can think of in the Korean culture to create 2.5 to 3 seasons of this fantastic, phenomenal story, they followed every trope. In the moment, 1, they underpaid their actors. 2, they wouldn't let them have anything to do with the writing. Nothing. Tropes what made money. Tropes is what they followed. When they stepped back and went, hey, listen, people are willing to listen. People love the show. We have a lot of media coverage and we have fans. Let us tell the story now. You know what happened to it? You could put up Sharon's message again, Molly, because that's what happened to it. The studio said, well, no, we're not going to pay you for what you know. 2, people really don't want to hear what you have to say because we don't think they will do. Even after 3 successful seasons, you're telling me people don't want to hear what the actual actors have to say? Simu, for God's sakes, who is now part of the MCU dynamic. For God's sakes, you're going to tell me that Simu people don't want to hear what he has to say? Are you out of your mind right now? Come on. How do you end a production? And then not only that, the actor said, fine, hand it to us. We'll take it up from here. We got this. We can do this thing. And CBC, I think is what she said.
Yes.
Broadcasting system will not. They refuse. They would rather shut it down and end it where it is than allow it to move on to where the narrative is now told by the people who it actually belongs to. It is. Yes, I'm passionate about it.
That's what happened on Living Single too. They did the same thing. Like the actors were like, "Hey, can we have some input?" And they were like, "Nah, we'd rather just shut it all down." It's like, why would you do that?
Yeah, that's actually what happened with Jyoti. You have to. Oh, even with Avatar: Last Airbender, the Korra dynasty, the way it was being told by Brian and Mike was pure beauty, incarnate beauty. But then you have the studio going, but people don't want to hear that story. And we don't want to keep investing in this story. So you can't tell it yourself. So guess what? We shut you down. Is what. Go ahead.
No, the very concept of that just makes me angry because because we can kind of go back to what Javier was mentioning earlier. When you do allow people to tell those stories and you bring in the communities that you're talking about and let them have control over that narrative, let them tell that story, it makes money. So that's a lie. I mean, we can look. I mean,
look at
Black Panther.
Crazy Rich Asians. The whole thing,
right there.
But here's the thing.
Letitia said something during storyboarding. What was it called? The Law of Universality.
Yeah, the myth.
Talk about it.
So my thing is the myth of universality, right? So if you think about the way that I would say both American and Canadian broadcasting works, there's this idea that there's a, we'll say 30-year-old white dude in the middle of Wisconsin. And if you cater toward him and make him comfortable, then everyone will be okay. So it's like, so I call it like the myth of universality, because as we've seen, yes, it's totally possible to connect with people who have different backgrounds than you do, but people who don't fall into this, narrow demographic have practice and are expected to always connect with people who look different than they are. Whereas people who do fall in that demographic, the idea that they could connect with someone who is different from them is like, what? No, that's impossible. And so that keeps, the usually centrally white stories, called universal, and those who, and those
Asian stories.
Sorry,
right?
you're Asian. Yes, European American.
European
Those
American stories.
stories,
Thank you.
those stories are kept in the central space, and then those of people who have different backgrounds are kept in the niche space. And so you have this completely completely separated dynamic, which is so hard to break. And if the broadcasters still think that that's the way it works, then that's what they're going for. And then even when you have something like Kim's Convenience or other properties which have people of color in the front, the idea is that the kind of European Americans' perspective on other people is more important than people's perspective of themselves, or that the European perspective on other people is more relatable to the dude in the middle of Wisconsin than a authentic perspective of someone who is of that culture.
Which is why no one wanted to take the chance on Crazy Rich Asians, and look at what Crazy Rich Asians proved to the world. Look at what that acting, like the ballistics of that acting angst proved to the world, and how many of those actors have now gone on to other roles quite successfully, and proving that they can play any role. As a matter of fact, what, you can play other roles? Yeah, absolutely. I call it living. I was going to tell you that. Oh my God! Like I was so worked up by what you were saying, Letitia, my brain lost it already. Oh my God. I don't think that anyone in any place in this existence, unless they want to exist in a specific space, has to be relegated to that space. I believe anyone can do anything as long as they want to, choose to, and gain the skills to be able to do that thing. That is how I feel. So,
I do want to bring this back to.
No, go ahead.
I just want to bring up one point real quick. I just want to bring up real quick about how the authentic voice. If we want to go into geekdom real quick, think of Iron Man. Think of that first movie. They changed one little subtle thing because they wanted to be relevant with the times, but they kept that story almost exactly, I want to say 80% true to what Iron Man was from his beginnings. And look, it became the springboard for the entire Marvel universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, off of a very authentic story. I feel like a lot of the stories have suffered because they've lost a lot of that authenticity, translating from a pop culture to another pop culture. But it's an example of how well Iron Man did, that you could say, take that into every other culture, take that into every other story. Those authentic voices always do well when they're done right. Like you said, Crazy Rich Asian, done right, or done as close as possible to being right. And they did a really good job with that, and look how well it did. Same thing with Black Panther. Another idea that was then taken from the community, had input. And, I talked about Coco and Moana before. More input from the culture. It makes a difference, and it builds on stuff that people want to see.
And you have to be I'm sorry. You have to be your authentic self too. Like even just outside of, it's race, it's your brain. Like me having mental health issues, you didn't talk about that when we were growing up, and not being able to say that was part of a lack of authenticity for me. And then when I met Neisha at MegaCon, of course, I was like, yes, everything about this, because now that I have this diagnosis and I have all these things my family didn't know, nobody outside my family knew, and now they're like to my mom, like, why didn't you tell us? I'm like, now I just want to happily tell you, like, be your authentic self outside of this box, tell your story, and then other people can tell that story that we weren't telling. to begin with.
Letitia's part of the reason, honestly, because we were on another podcast, but she's part of the reason we started having a conversation about being on the spectrum, and all of this stuff started coming up. Like, this was maybe a year ago, like fairly recent, but when I tell you I started doing deep dives, because I was like, oh my God. Like, I mean, eye-opening, and then I started looking more and more into it. At some point I'll go in for like an actual diagnosis, but you know, barriers. But yeah, I started looking at, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what it is. That's what it is. And I mean, when I tell you everything just like click, 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 click from like childhood, and how my brain, everything started to click. And like, that is like, I mean, that's just with another person. Had I like been able to like see that getting played out in various different ways across media, like, I just wonder how different my life would have been. Like, I mean, and I want to stressful.
I want to kind of wrap that up. We're going to wrap that up really quick. Yeah, because it's about time for us to go. And I'm hearing a couple of things about just how various fandoms, you know, influence our self-esteem, influence the stories that we tell ourselves, and how we feel validated or don't. And you know, and that shapes us. So it's, you know, so it's important that when we're talking about the media that we create, the media that we see, the media that we critique, that having that understanding of how those things create our self-concept in various ways is just, you know, definitely something to bring to the fore. And as you've heard, lovely internet audience, all 10 million of you,
There probably are 10 million.
That this work is super important. And so, you know, we do need to have, you know, diversity in presentation of mental health. You mentioned Iron Man. Could someone else besides Robert Downey Jr. have played Iron Man that well, given all the shit that he had been through in his life? You know, talking about someone who had gone through addictions, who had so many things in his life. And I mean, I saw that in that character and that redemption arc. And I don't know if anyone else could have played that so genuinely. And we, you know, that's also one of the things we won't talk about as much. We won't necessarily talk about people who have, you know, addictive personality traits as people who could be heroes. As
Mind
people
you, RBJ, he lived that in real life.
That's what I'm saying.
And then
he owned it, you know, 100% owned it.
Right, and that's another aspect of showing that diverse, inclusive story and being able to bring your genuineness to the work. So yeah, I think that's almost time. So should we have people share their socials?
We're going to do that. I just wanted to end with my last 30-second prompt that we ended with in our discussion about the fact that one of the reasons I created this entire mass organization the way we're doing it was because of the mental health spectrum I've lived in. Two, because as you all know, my brother left this world in a way that was not a happy one. So because of his journey, I can never not cry with this, guys. It's so hard for me. But because of the struggle that he lived his whole life, my struggle, I needed to find a way and the platforms for us to be able to live a more inclusive, a more connective way, and create touch points where a person like me, my little 55-year-old Indian woman self, can feel connected to everything and find my connections, find my mirror. And it's taken forever to start seeing something anywhere near who I am. I actually still don't see it. And so the one thing I needed to do was to create it myself. So I'm making my own mirror. I'm making my own door. We are creating the scripts ourselves, and that's what you're all part of. So that's what we're doing today, my friends, where we're launching this new narrative. And I thank you and I bless you all for being part of that and trusting me. Trusting me and trusting us, the BG team. So go ahead and everyone, let's go ahead and go through socials. That'll be amazing. Neisha, you want to start with you, my love? Sure.
So you can find me on the interwebs. I have my podcast, Introspectional, and you can also find Introspectional on Twitter and on Instagram. And so it's The way it's spelled is intersectional with a P after the S. So that's the simplest way to remember it. You can also find me on Twitter at Leticia_creates.
I know we have that up there somewhere. We just have to find it. Okay, Miss Latoya.
Yes, I am at Latoya the Alien, like Megan the Stallion. Got be a little nerd, little ratchet. That's me. On all of the socials. And then I do have a podcast. It is called Insightful Alien, but I am gearing up to start another podcast here pretty soon. So do be on the lookout for that as well.
And this is Lauren.
So yes, I'm kind of going under this persona of the poetic engineer. So Instagram is _poetic engineer. My website is poeticengineer.com. Working on the podcast that will cover all of these topics. And my Facebook page is at Engineer Poetic, and Twitter is Poetic Engineer. I think I got them all right.
Okay. And we have JC.
You guys can find me on Twitter at WJCDUBYUHJAYCEE. You guys can also find me on Facebook at JC Callowworth W, of course, and you can find my group, Gamer Allied People of Color, at facebook.com/groups/GAPOC.
Awesome. And Javier?
So you can find me on Twitter at the THA Learning Curve, and then on Instagram it's THE for the Learning Curve. Neither one of them have an E. So the Learning Curve on Twitter, the Learning Curve on Instagram, and then my website is thecurve.com.
Thecurve.com. I'm so sorry we can't. It's not here. I'm so sorry. And Mr. Jackson.
Yes, sacrednowpod.com. That's my podcast. It's called The Sacred Now. Sacrednowpod.com. Leticia and Latoya have both been multiple time guests on the show, and those episodes are fantastic. So we do stuff like this, have conversations like this all the time. Sacrednowpod.com.
I found you, Latoya.
Oh yes.
All right, thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. And
Wait. Oh, Lizzie's here.
Lizzie, I'm trying to find you though. Hold on, love. Go ahead, Lizzie, because your stuff, we cannot find it for some reason. Go ahead. Can you hear us, Lizzie? Can you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about this.
Tell us where to find you, honey. Social media.
Okay. You can find me on Facebook. I can hear you. I hope you guys can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my social media, you can find me on Facebook on the shrew2020.com. You can find me on Twitter, Lizzie Martinez 2015.
Perfect. Thank you so much. One last beautiful comment. I'm going to put that one up. I didn't want Terry not to be heard. Terry's coming to us live from Ireland, guys, so definitely want to make sure Terry's. And thank you so much for interacting, my friend. Okay, everyone, we're going to bounce out, and I have to run to my next workshop. Please, everyone, tune in for the next one, because Molly and I are actively going to be walking you through how to use our worksheets, okay, and our model. Y'all have a great day. Much love to everyone.
Bye.
IDDC forever.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Panarello, and I'm the Director of Research here at Diversely Geek. I'm also a nurse practitioner in the field of hematology-oncology, where I treat patients with various blood and immune system cancers undergoing chemotherapy. I joined Diversely Geek almost 7 years ago to the day when I met my bestie Neisha Mulchan at the opening of Diagon Alley at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, actually on my honeymoon. And it allowed us to connect and bond over one of our favorite fandoms. Another one of my favorite fandoms happens to be anything Disney or Lilo and Stitch. This is because many years ago, about 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with a form of rheumatoid arthritis. And while I was undergoing that diagnosis, I was in a lot of pain and going through depression, and escaping into these worlds of like the wizarding world or anything Disney allowed me to forget about my symptoms and about my pain for a little while. I actually do this at work with my patients now, where I wear Disney-related socks, or I wear a golden snitch on my ID badge, and it allows the patients to ask about it and talk about, fandoms and Disney and Harry Potter and anything other than their cancer or their symptoms. Joining Diversely Geek was an important part of my life, because being a nurse and a nurse practitioner, I realized how important mental health and wellness is on a person's global health. And that actually is part of my job here, where I research the impacts of escaping into the world of fandom and connecting with people who have, similar interests, and how these impact somebody's mental health and wellness. That's the whole point of Diversely Geek, is allowing everyone to connect over something that they have in common and can make them escape their troubles and their lives a little bit, or even find somebody with a common value or view and be able to open up and talk about your daily problems with them, which is very important in your own mental health, because it allows you to release and let go of some of these problems that you're dealing with. It was nice to meet all of you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person one day at some cons or any workshops that we may be having. Take care.